I'm going to start the presentation right now and go into the first slide as promised. So the first slide that I've prepared for today is a small overview of the legal acts that we have on European Union level, because I think this is quite crucial since we're talking about legislative procedures. It's good to know what different types are out there, and this is quite easy. Just one look into the treaties brings a lot of clarification, especially here we have the Article 288 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union that specifies that here at this level we have the following types that you can also see here. These are the regulations, the directives, decisions. We also have opinion and recommendations. I have put opinions and recommendations in brackets because from a legal point of view, they are not very interesting. Lawyers do not deem them as very important because they're not legally binding. So they might have some political influence or some political weight, but from a legal perspective, they do not count a lot. And as far as the others are concerned, I'm just going to briefly go into each one of them. So the regulations are basically, I think, one of the crucial acts that we have here, because they are acts of general application. So this means that they apply to a big number of different cases. And what's important about them is they become immediately legally binding in the member states. So you don't need any implementation acts. You don't need the national legislator to become active, but they become immediately binding law in the member states of the European Union. Then we also have the so-called directives, and the directives are addressed to the member state. And the difference between directives and regulations is that the directives are binding upon the member state, but the member state has some kind of discretion as to how they actually put this into practice. That means that we need still the national legislator to become active and to transpose these directives into national law before they become legally binding. And that's the difference between regulations and directives. So here, if you don't have the National Legislative Act, you basically do not have binding law. There are certain exceptions to this, but I don't want to go here more into detail. And then the last type of legislative act that we have here are the so-called decisions. And the decisions are addressed to a specific person, so they have a specific addressee of this act, and they're legally binding only in respect to that person. So for instance, if the European Commission decides to fine Microsoft for the abuse of a dominant position, this is the legal act they are going to use. It's going to be a decision addressed specifically at Microsoft and setting up a certain amount. So this is it with regard to what we have in terms of legal acts. And now I would like to go to the next basically topic, and this is the interinstitutional decision making. And here we're going to take a look at how are actually the legislative decisions taken, what is the procedure employed, and who is involved in it. And one of the important principles here in this regard, or the basic principles that we have, is that the European Union can only decide within the framework of the competencies that are fixed by the treaties. That means that the European Union can become active also with all the different institutions only if the competences have been transferred from the member state to the Union. So if the Union does not have the competence to take a decision in this regard, we don't have a legislative procedure. And starting basically from this principle, we have the 4 different procedures that I've put in here. And what's important with regard to decision making is we have the so-called institutional triangle. That means that we have the Commission involved, we have the Council, and we have the Parliament. And how that is divided between the 3 institutions, we're going to take a look a little bit later. But the Commission is basically responsible for starting the legislative initiative, and then we have one of the major decision makers in the European Union, that's the Council. That's basically where also the whole of the European Union originates, because from member states, this is where we had the traditional incentives basically to create the European Union. So this is also one of the major decision-making bodies with regard to legislative procedures. And what varies throughout the different procedures is also the role of the European Parliament, and this is what changes. basically. So if we take a look at the co-decision, or the so-called ordinary legislative procedure, this is where we have the Council and the European Parliament on equal footing. That means that we can only have here a legislation passed if both institutions agree on the legislative proposal in question, and if one institution does not agree with it, we don't have a legal act at all. If we take a look at the first procedure, the so-called consent or assent procedure, this is also basically divided between the Council and the European Parliament, but the difference here between the consent assent procedure and the co-decision procedure is that the influence that the Parliament can exert is a little bit limited. This means that we can only have a legal act if the European Parliament gives its consent or assent, but this is basically a one-reading procedure. This means that the Parliament can either say yes or no to the legislative proposals. So that means that if they adopt it, we have a legally binding act, but if they reject it, there is no act that comes into being. But this is about it. So the European Parliament cannot actually work on this subject matter as such. So they cannot propose any changes with regard to substance. And this is why they have here a rather limited competence. And certain examples for this type of procedures are, for instance, the accession of new member states. So these are the major decisions taken also in the European Union, or, for instance, association agreements. You also need the consent of the European Parliament. But again, what you have to remember here is that the scope of influence the European Parliament can exert is rather limited. Then we also have the so-called consultation procedure, where the position of the European Parliament is weaker than in co-decision and the assent or consent procedure. So here, basically, the Council cannot take a decision without consulting the European Parliament. So the European Parliament has to issue an opinion on the subject matter in question. But this is where everything ends also. So the Council is obliged to wait for the opinion of the European Parliament, and the opinion of the European Parliament can be either positive, negative, or they can also make certain suggestions with regard to the subject matter, but the Council is not obliged to take this into account. So the Council can just proceed as they wish, and they're not obliged in any way to basically take on board the recommendations that the Parliament does. And this is why in the consultation procedure, the European Parliament issues a so-called opinion. And again, if we think back to the previous slide, when I said the opinion and recommendations, they're not interesting for us from a legal perspective, just because they're non-legally binding. This is what applies here as well. That's why the position of the Parliament this year is a rather weak one. And the fourth procedure that I've put here on the slide, that's the budgetary procedure. And here basically we have the European Parliament and the Council are also on equal footing. So they can only take the decision together, otherwise we don't have a budget, whereby when we go to the last stage, the conciliation stage, the Parliament has a slightly stronger position with the Council, but I do not want to bother you here with the details. So the only thing that you have to remember here is that we have basically 3 to 4 procedures that are important, and what changes basically from procedure to procedure is the position of the European Parliament. So the Council remains the strongest actor, and the Parliament is either on equal footing with the Council or is in a weaker position. So, and now if you go to the co-decision, basically I would want to give you a small overview of the basic features of co-decision. So with the entry of force of the Treaty of Lisbon, the co-decision procedure became the so-called ordinary legislative procedure, and here I've put also the treaty article, so you can consult what's set out in the treaties with regard to this. And what's also important, I've mentioned this already, is the so-called principle of parity. That means that the Parliament and the Council are on equal footing. So the co-decision procedure was introduced in '93 with the Maastricht Treaty. Back then it was a big innovation. basically to strengthen the position of the Parliament and this interinstitutional triangle. And originally it applied just to 15 different fields of action of the European Union. Right now, after the entry of force of the Treaty of Lisbon, the co-decision became basically the standard procedure for adopting legislation on European Union level, and it covers about 83 different areas. And one of the most important areas also that have come on board right now is the area of agriculture, that takes up also one of the biggest parts of the EU budget, and now it is also subject to the co-decision procedure, where actually the decision can be only taken by Parliament and the Council together. What's also important about the co-decision procedure is that normally it's accompanied by a qualified majority voting in the Council, which is also not a given because we have also a long development in the European Union, where once upon a time decisions started off with unanimity, which is quite difficult to achieve, especially nowadays having 27 member states in the Council. So it's easier if you have 6 member states, but 27 is a bit more difficult if you need to take everybody on board. And with the co-decision procedure, that's not the case, because here we have a qualified majority vote, and in the past we've had certain areas that were still subject to an anonymity vote. For instance, like the area of social security. But that was also abolished by the entry of force of the Treaty of Lisbon. So now the area of social security is also subjected to qualified majority voting, with the only difference that if some of the member states consider that the decision to be taken in this area affects the fundamental principles of how the system functions, so they can basically suspend the procedure and call the European Council, and then the European Council is bound to take a decision within 4 months on this. And if they decide to suspend the procedure, this is the end of the co-decision procedure. And if they think that the fundamental principles of the systems are not affected, they would refer basically the decision back to the Council, and then the co-decision procedure will continue as it has to be. These are the so-called emergency breaks that actually have retained right for the certain member states just to safeguard this principle, and are some kind of compensation for having now the qualified majority vote in the Council. What's also important with regard to the co-decision procedure is, I've mentioned this also before, the European Commission makes a legislative proposal and then sends it simultaneously to the Council and to the European Parliament. But this does not mean that the Commission is completely out of the picture and has nothing to say throughout the procedure. That's not the case, because the Commission still remains on board, and Roberta is going to talk more about this into detail, about how it functions, but basically all 3 institutions remain on board until the very end of the procedure. And that means also that the Commission has the right, for instance, or the possibility to force the Council to vote not by qualified majority voting, by anonymity, if it does not endorse amendments that have been proposed by the European Parliament. So this is how the Commission still retains a right of power to remain in the whole picture. So it also means that the Council can only decide by qualified majority voting if with the support of the Commission. I think this is everything that I wanted to tell you with regard to the general overview of this procedure. Here I've put in a slide that looks quite complicated, so just outlining the whole procedure. So what you see here on the left is how everything starts. It looks too complicated, but actually it's not, because co-decision procedure encompasses 3 readings. So we have the legislative initiative that originates from the Commission with certain exceptions, and then we have the first reading with the European Parliament and the Council. If a decision is not reached or an agreement is not reached at that stage, we can go into second reading, and if that fails as well, we can go into third reading, the so-called conciliation. Well, this is in general something that it's better avoided, because that means that we have some political problem or the file is very problematic. And usually if you go to the third stage, the procedure lasts a very long time. We've also prepared here some slide with statistics where you can see how the procedure basically develops throughout the time. And what we can also see is here a comparison between the legislative period 2004 and 2004 and 2009. And what you can see very clearly from here is that there is an increased tendency of reaching a first stage agreement in the co-decision process. So in the first legislative period from 1999 to 2004, we had 33%. At the moment, 72%. That means that 72% of the files are completed at first reading, which is generally a very welcome development, because that means that the whole process is speeded up. That means that the institutions function also very well in finding an agreement with each other. One of the negative aspects of this is that we don't have such big transparency anymore, because everything is put out in the informal negotiations. But I think Roberto is going to talk more about this. And we also have some agreements on second reading, and only very few files reach the conciliation stage. So at the moment it's about 5%. Previously there were 21%. So that's also a dramatic increase. Also, something else that I wanted to mention is that basically the major difference between first and second reading is that actually in first reading we have no deadlines running, so we have no time limits. So once the legislative proposal is transmitted to the Council and to the European Parliament, they have no restriction whatsoever on when they're going to discuss these proposals. That's not the case in second reading. Here, once we reach the second reading stage, then the European Parliament and the Council have 3 months to decide. They can extend this period by 1 month. And here the European Parliament is a little bit in a weaker position, because in the second reading, if they don't reach an agreement within the 3 months, then the proposal is deemed as adopted. So that's one of the major differences between the two stages. Here, basically, it's another slide with statistics, where you can also see how things have developed. So if you follow the first reading is the dark blue line, and you see that in the period 1999 to 2000, we had very few files that were completed at first reading. At the moment, that's the biggest number of files, while at the same time we see a decrease of the files that have been completed in second reading, and a dramatic decrease of the files that are completed in third reading. As a last slide here with regard to the general overview of the co-decision procedure, I've prepared for you just some statistics that indicate the average duration of the procedure, and you can see the shortest, basically the average duration of first reading is somewhere between 13.8, so 14 and 15 months. But this is just average numbers, and the problem with average numbers is that they do not indicate the real time period that is taken. So if you take a look here at the shortest and longest procedure, the shortest is about 2 months, and the longest period of time is 4 years, which is quite considerable also for a first reading agreement. 4 years to have legislation adopted in first reading, it's quite a lot. With second reading, the average numbers is about 2 years, 2.5 years, but again, these are just indicative numbers. You can see that can last anywhere between a year and 9 to 10 years. In conciliation, that's the last stage we said, this is quite a problematic stage. They can last up to 159 months, which is quite a lot. That's about 11 years or so. And here you can ask yourself questions of how relevant can legislation be after 11 years of adoption process. So much about the statistics. I'll just say a few words about the right of legislative initiative, because before I pass on the word to Roberto. So basically this right lies with the European Commission. I've put in also here the treaty articles that you can consult if you would like to have additional information. That's quite a considerable right, because it puts the Commission in a very strong position, because that way the Commission basically also shapes the agenda of the other institutions. It determines of what comes on the agenda of the European Parliament and the Council at the same time. And the European Commission is the sole institution that has this right. Of course, every rule has also certain exceptions, so I've listed them also here. There are certain small exceptions from this general rule that only the Commission prepares legislative initiatives. And the first one is a quarter of member states for the area of judicial cooperation in criminal matters and police cooperation. This is a remnant of the former third pillar where we had, because in this area that was until the entry of force of the Treaty of Lisbon, that was subject basically to intergovernmental cooperation. That means that the Council was the major decision-making body in this area. And here we had a quarter of member state, they could start a certain legislative initiative. And this is why this was retained also in the new treaty, because this whole basically area was subjected now to the so-called community method, or what should rightly be called now the so-called European Union method. So that means that member states have given up their competencies to the European Union level. The other exceptions that we have is also for the European Central Bank and the European Court of Justice. But again, the central body in this regard is the Commission. And it not only shapes basically the agenda of the European Parliament and of the Council, but the European Commission is also in a quite a strong position here, because it's actually the institution that gets to draft the legislative proposal. And that's also quite considerable power, because here the European Commission can choose out of a wide variety of different methods to achieve a certain objective and put this in the original draft. And of course this is much stronger, because if you have already an initial proposal, then this can be discussed by the other institutions, but you have made already a pre-choice for the others for discussion. What's also quite important is that actually the biggest number of legislative initiatives actually end up as real legislation. For instance, if you take a look at the United States, there only 5% of the legislative proposals actually become laws, while in the European Union we have a rate of 95%. That means that 95% of the proposals of the European Commission actually end up as legal acts. Which is quite crucial also with regard to the legislative initiative. That's the role of the national parliaments. That's also an innovation brought in by the Treaty of Lisbon. We did not have this before, so right now when the European Commission prepares a legislative proposal, then this legislative proposal is sent out to all national parliaments, and they have 8 weeks time to examine whether the principle of subsidiarity has been adhered to. And here, for instance, if we have 1/3 of the national parliaments contest this decision and say, well, the principle of subsidiarity has not been adhered to in this regard, then the Commission has to re-examine the proposal and actually bring in a justification. And here we have 2 different types of procedures. What I have just described as the so-called yellow card procedure. We also have an orange card procedure. That means that if national parliaments decide by a simple majority that the principle of subsidiarity has not been adhered to, that the Commission is forced to re-examine it and provide a justification if they want to stick to the proposal. And what's crucial here is that when this proposal then ends with the European Parliament and the Council, then this is the first question that is examined by the 2 institutions. And here they can also vote on it and either support the opinion of the national parliaments or not. What's also crucial, but is not here on this slide, is the so-called citizens' initiative. This is also being brought by the Treaty of Lisbon. And here, if we have 1 million of citizens that come from about 1/4 of the European Union member states, that means about 7 member states out of the 27, they can also ask the European Commission to launch an initiative in a certain area, be it in the area of environment or any other area concerning the competences of the European Union. What's crucial with regard to this is that it increases, of course, citizens' participation. It looks very nice, but at the end of the day, it's still the European Commission that decides, so they're not legally bound in any way to launch the legislative initiative. So the citizens' initiative can be used as a political tool also to put the Commission a little bit under political pressure, but actually this institution is the one that decides at the end of the day what's going to happen. I think I'm going to end it with here. I had prepared also another slide for you about the internal decision-making procedure within the Commission, but I think you have dealt with that also in one of the past lectures, so I would advise you to take a look at the slides as a little bit of a refresher of what happens inside the Commission. So what's crucial here is the so-called inter-service consultation, where basically different Commission services are consulted on the legislative proposal in question. What's also crucial is that the Commission also consults with third parties, interest groups, and this is really important because this is where actually the Commission receives information of what the crucial questions are with regard to the subject matter in the area, or what problematic areas there are that need to be dealt with. And I think now I'm going to stop and give over the word to Roberto, who's going to give you more in-depth information on how the procedure actually goes. And in case you have any questions with regard to what I have told you, you're welcome to ask them via the chat, or otherwise you can drop me an email. So thank you very much for your attention, and now Roberto, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everybody. It's my first time on webinar, so just in front of nobody, just a computer, so please be patient with me because I don't know how it works and if it will work in one aspect or the other. So I think, yes, this is my presentation. It will be a little bit difficult to add something to what Alina said because she said a lot of things, and basically she said many times, have something, I leave the floor to Roberto to go into details, but I mean, I don't think I have much more details to what she said. But I would try, in any case, to give the perspective of the Council about the ordinary legislative procedure. And, well, so we can start with an overview of what we will say about this. So we'll talk about first reading agreement. The early second reading, in one of the slides of Lena, you have read early second reading, but now the early second reading is called pre-negotiated council position at first reading. And we will understand why it's called now pre-negotiated position. Then we have the second reading agreement, the conciliation procedure, and we will talk a little bit about the role of GQL, which are the law linguists. Many times they are disregarded for presentation, but they are extremely important. And then the role of a little bit the role of the decision unit where I'm working. So just adding something, because she said that correctly, that the majority of the procedure now, decision-making procedures are under ordinary legislative procedure. But we have also special legislative procedure and non-legislative procedure. So talking about the first one, it's done adoption by the European Parliament and the Council of regulations. She explained a little bit about regulation immediately applicable to citizens of member states. Directive, which are legal acts of principles, which need the implementation by member states, and decisions which are immediately applicable and directed to one specific person, or even one specific state. I remember decision on fiscal acts, for example, they go directly to member states. Then in the special legislative procedure is a little bit different because we have legal acts adopted by the Council with the participation of the Parliament. So what she said was she mentioned as consultation okay, or consent to assent. And then you have in the slides some examples where when the treaty asks the institutions to apply this special legislative procedure, but this is not the core part of our presentation, because our presentation is on the first one, so the ordinary legislative procedure. And then we have the non-legislative procedure, which is at the end, and is on Article 16 to 290 of the treaty and 297. The 290 is extremely important because it talks about delegated acts. So as let me say, as a sort of power given to the Commission to decide how to implement part of a directive or part of a legislative act. Usually, I can give an example of delegated acts on, for example, list of, let me say, countries which need to cooperate or stay inside a certain threshold for environment, for instance. And therefore, you need to update this list as long as the technology evolve or the legislation of member states evolve. So you need to have a quick answer to this implementation of the directive, and therefore the Council and the Parliament give the power to the Commission to revise, for example, the list, and it has to be done in a quick way. So this is the best procedure is to allow the Commission to do it, to give trust the Commission in doing this job. This is really, in a few words, what happens about non-legislative procedure and delegated acts. So we know that there are 3 readings plus, not plus, is so-called plus conciliation, but actually is the third reading is the conciliation. The legislative act is proposed, as we know, Alina said already, from the Commission, quarter member state, the European Central Bank, the ECJ, and then she mentioned, and it's not here, the Citizens Initiative. Actually, for the ECJ, I only remember once it was a statute of the Court of Justice, so this is the only proposal, if I'm not wrong, we received from the Court of Justice. In 2 cases, which is on social security and judicial cooperation, we can have a member state, the possibility for a member state to request that the issue could be referred to the European Council. So sometimes it's not only the proposal from member states, but we also have the cooperation or the opinion, we need the opinion of the European Council, which, as you know, is not the Council of the European Union. It is just the Council Prime Minister. The request to suspend the procedure, or the ordinary legislative procedure, we are inside the ordinary legislative procedure. And then when the member states ask for these 2 matters, social security or judicial cooperation, to refer the matter to the European Council, then we suspend the procedure for 4 months, in which the European Council can act, can give its opinion. Well, now we go to the role of national parliaments, because in the role of national parliaments inside the ordinary legislative procedure. So we are not talking about the right of initiative, we are just talking about what parliaments can do when inside the OLP. So this is in Article 12 of the European Union Treaty and Protocols 1 and 2. Basically, when you have a proposal, you have to give all information to the national parliaments. And there is a period of 8 weeks from transmission to adoption, transmission of the proposal to the national parliaments and the adoption of that proposal, except in duly justified urgency. But don't ask me, because I've never seen it during my time there in the Constitution Union justified urgency. So what they do, Alina said already, they check compliance with the principle of subsidiarity. And if they don't think, looking at the proposal, they don't think that the Commission has acted in a good way, so they think that the principle of subsidiarity is not respected, and they are affected by the proposal, they can say that at least one-third of national parliaments, or in a particular case in Article 76, a quarter, if they think that the proposal is not compliant with that principle, so the draft of the proposal might be reviewed, and there is an opinion by the Commission of Venice particularly. So the Commission has to answer to them to say, sorry, but this is not the right way. This is affecting the principle of subsidiarity. This is affecting our power, our competence. So you have to revise the proposal. In the last case, is when a majority of the national parliaments, so not only one-third, but a majority think that the proposal is not compliant, so the issue will be considered also by the co-legislators after raising opinion from the Commission. So in the first one, case, one-third of the national parliaments. So basically, what I was saying is that you have a check from the national parliaments on the principle of subsidiarity. So you have two different possibilities. If one-third of national parliaments, or a quarter in Article 76, so if one-third of national parliaments believes that the proposal is not compliant, they may ask to review the draft, and the reasoned opinion must be taken. So a reasoned opinion from the Commission. But what is the role of the co-legislator? There is no role at this stage, but there is a role for the co-legislator if the majority of national parliaments thinks that the proposal is not compliant with the principle of subsidiarity. In this case, the issue has to be considered by the co-legislator after a reasoned opinion from the Commission. So we always have the reasoned opinion from the Commission. As Alina already said, for the first reading we have no timings. Now we are going in depth in the OLP. This rule is applicable independently either to the EP on first reading, so European Parliament first reading, either on the Council on its first reading. So I think that you have no time limits for the first and for the second. This means that as the Parliament has to react always as the first, as to act as the first one, we have to wait in any case the position of the Parliament at first reading before the Council the opportunity to react. So in one slide of Alina, you said that there were 10 years for a proposal. Okay, so it means that it can stay 5 years before having the first position adopted by the European Parliament, and then you can have other 5 years before the Council adopts its position. The agreement, as you can understand, the agreement on the first reading means that the Council adopts the text adopted by the EP in its position without amendments, without modifications. So I think it's another time to help some of you that don't have a clear idea of what happens, how it works, the procedure, by using a small example. So if you think it's like a tennis game, then you can understand that we have some rules. So in this tennis game, which is called OLP, Ordinary Legislative Procedure, the first who serves is always the Parliament. They are always serving the first. And then the match can start. Okay, so they serve, and if the Council don't react and says that, okay, we agree, then we have the point. If the Council doesn't want or doesn't accept the position or the service of the European Parliament, then they can react to the answer. And then when we answer, they adopt this exchange from the Council is its position. So they react adopting their position. So now we start the second game. So as the Parliament has to react to the reaction of the Council. If they agree, then we have the so-called early second reading, because we are in the second exchange. And if they accept, it's okay. If they don't accept, they go back. They launch back the ball to the council, and so on, until the conciliation. So first, remember always that Parliament has to serve. So we can have some strange situation, and you can understand that with this, you can play sort of pressure on the other one. For instance, we have a proposal which is interesting for the Council, but not for the European Parliament. So the European Parliament, before adopting a position, can wait, because they are not under pressure. And the Council has to put pressure on the Parliament, please, adopt your position, otherwise we cannot adopt our position. And then you can understand that it's a question of power. In the negotiation now, this question of time limits could be a question of power, but could be vice versa. So the European Parliament wants to have a proposal because it's interest for them, but the Council is quite reluctant. So they adopt immediately their position, but the Council is reluctant, so they don't adopt their position. This is part of the game. So you may understand that not only negotiations, power negotiations, but also the power itself that two institutions have is playing a major role in adopting a proposal. So now we know that there is no time limit in the first reading, but there are time limits in the second reading. So we have 3 months, or the European Parliament has 3 months to approve, reject, or amend the Council's position. At the same time, when the European Parliament adopts its second position, then there are at the same time 3 months for the Council to approve, reject, or amend the Parliament's amendments. Okay, there's not more positions amendments. Why 3 plus 1? 3 plus 1 because on paragraph 14 or Article 294 is written that the time can be extended by a month or 2 weeks. We will see 2 weeks is for conciliation if requested by the European Parliament or the Council. So if one of the two institutions requests to have an extended period, they can have it for 1 month. I can assure you that 3 months or 3 plus 1 are not enough. So there are strict time, because and we will see very soon about Trilogues. They have to meet, so and with all the problems they have, MEP and the Council, with all the timetable, the agenda, the business, and the full agenda they have, MEP and presidency of the Council, it's quite difficult to have a time for a meeting. In the meantime, you have also to prepare a new draft. So believe me, it's quite short time. So when they start the second reading, both institutions are under pressure. Well, the third reading or conciliation. So we have 6, again, plus 2 is extended to convene the conciliation committee. Again, 6 weeks for the committee to reach agreement on the joint text, and again, 6 weeks for the co-legislator to have the common text adopted. You can see in the slides of Alina when she has all the timetable of the procedure. It's not timetable, was just a scheme of the time of the procedure adoption of acts. At the end, you have 6 weeks for adoption, because even if the conciliation committee finds a compromise, the co-legislators, so the Council one side, and the European Parliament on the other side, they can decide to reject the joint text prepared or the compromise prepared by the Conciliation Committee. This is the reason why we have this extra phase of 6 weeks for the co-legislature to adopt the joint text, the common text found by the Conciliation Committee. So, how it works in the first reading. So, the Council and the European Parliament, they work in parallel, because in Council you have working party, means that administration, member states meet themselves with experts of various member states to discuss the proposal. Once you have, then you have the presidency, which is rotating, so every 6 months, is chairing this working party, and then you have the discussion and the position of all member states, and you try to find a compromise or a position of a common position of the Council. Then you go up one level and you go to the Coreper, which is the the committee of permanent representative can be ambassador or vice ambassador. It depends on the Coreper. We have two Coreper, 1 and 2, depending on the matters, the issues we are discussing. Coreper 2 is more on fiscal and PESC and defense and so on. Well, for the Coreper 1 is all of the other matters. And so when you have the Coreper, the presidency can seek a mandate to discuss, to have negotiation with the European Parliament. So before starting negotiations, the presidency needs to have a mandate from the Coreper, which comes from the discussion of the working group. It's quite important because as level trilogue we see very soon, in order to start negotiations with the other institution, you need to have a mandate. The mandate from the European Parliament, so we see in the mandate from the Council, but the mandate from the other side of the European Parliament is mandate given generally by the committee. You know, we have many committees, Trans Committee, it's on transport, ITRE, on market and business, international trade, and so on. We have many committees. So when we have a report from a rapporteur in the committee votes the report, this report can be taken as the mandate for negotiations. So they can start negotiations, the European Parliament can start negotiations when they have a mandate, which is usually the report. Alina, at the end of the presentation, say that we have problem transparency now, so because discussions are at the level of presidency of the Council, which represents the Council, and the committee, rapporteur and shadow rapporteur of the committee. But now there is a new trend in the European Parliament, so the mandate is the report. The mere mandate for the European Parliament is the report, but the report is not only approved and adopted by the committee, but has to go to the plenary and adopted also by the plenary. So they are moving all the reports to the plenary in order to have a good mandate. So now we have to wait to the plenary, which is once a month, more or less, to have a mandate to start the negotiations. Once you have the voting plenary, as you can see in the slides, then we can start. So the president can evaluate the possibility of an agreement and can organize first contacts with the EP. Here is written informal contacts because the contacts, and then we go to the next slide. The contacts are called trilogue, and you will not find anything about trilogues, which is a bad word coming from dialogue, but it actually is a new word. There are things you can find in a dictionary. But it gives the idea that there are three people, three institutions involved. In the trilogue, there are the three institutions that seeks to find a compromise. So you have a mandate. When they meet, you have a mandate from the Coreper, so from the Council. You have a mandate from the European Parliament, which is represented by the report, and they meet together to have to start the negotiations. And we can jump on this. Yes. So now we have we go in the first part of trilogue. This is the working method. So we have at this stage. So we are still talking about the first reading negotiations. We have the chair of the Council Working Party, or sometimes the Coreper chair, depends on the importance of the file. Is a choice of the presidency. And then you have also people in the trilogue from the service traitant, which is people of the Council, which is dealing. There is one administrator for each dossier, for each proposal, which is following the proposal and preparing draft. So it's called the service traitant. Then we have somebody from the legal service and somebody from the co-decision unit. Then we have on the other side the peer rapporteurs, shadow rapporteurs, assistants, and advisors of political groups. And you have also the so-called shadows rapporteurs. So, as I said, shadow rapporteurs are rapporteurs from other political groups. And they are supported by the committee, the EP Committee Secretariat and Legal Service of the European Parliament. Then you have also commission officials. So you have desk officer dealing with the file, the head of unit of the unit which is treating or wrote exactly the proposal, and sometimes you have director general or even we have the director and rarely director general. It is always dependent on the importance of the file. So what I try to discuss, they try to find a compromise on the text. They try to find a compromise, and everything is possible as long as it's acceptable by the council and by the parliament. So sometimes you have the commission which is not very happy with the compromise, but is a good compromise for the European Parliament and the council. So the commission try to push on a different direction, or you can have plays as a normal negotiations. What I was saying before, and I can add to trilogue, is that you cannot find anything on the trilogue in the treaty, because the treaty just talk about contacts. Now we know that the contacts are called trilogue, and then we have sometimes formal trilogues, informal trilogues, technical meetings, and so on. All these definitions are not in the treaty, but are usually, used and is in the jargon of the Council European Parliament. Well, that's a very formal trilogue. Well, before having a mandate, the rapporteur and the presidency can meet to see how is the atmosphere. So they can have an informal exchange of view of the possible future of the proposal. They say, oh, this proposal, for example, is very difficult, all the council is against, or all the MEPs are against, so it will be difficult. Oh, no, this will be an easy file, more or less the proposal commission is acceptable, so on. So you can have a formal, a first overview of what happens. But they cannot start negotiations. This cannot be co-negotiations, because, as I say, they need a mandate. So when they have a mandate, then you can start with the official, let me say official, even if they are always not official, because they're not in the treaty, the official trilogue. And you can have political trilogues in which you discuss the direction of the proposal, where we have to go, what you have to do, and the big picture of the proposal. And then you have also a technical meeting which follows the political one, in which you discuss the details. So, for example, you decided to change an article instead of asking for CO2 measurement, you ask for the measurement of other type of gases. And then you have the technical meeting defining this type of gases, because you don't have enough time in the trial to discuss also the small details. So once you have a trilogue, both the council and first of all the council, the presidency council has to go back to the Coreper to report the outcomes of the former trilogue and to seek a new mandate if is needed by the negotiations. They need to change some articles, as I said, or they need to change a little bit direction. For the European Parliament, this is done through the meetings where between the rapporteurs and the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteurs. So this is practical tips, but this is just for for the presidency to remind them that it is extremely important to have this context with the European Parliament and the Council. Why? Because when we say there are no time limits, it doesn't mean that the European Parliament freely decided the first position. It may happen, but usually the Council and the Parliament start to negotiate before the European Parliament adopts its first position. In order to have a first reading agreement, you already know that we need to have the same text adopted by the Parliament and by the Council. So it means that once the European Parliament adopts this position has to be comfortable for the Council. Okay, so they need to discuss before the adoption. So this is what happens. They start discussion before the adoption in the plenary of the position of the European Parliament, and then when they have found in trilogue a good compromise, usually they go to the Parliament, and immediately after, once the text is adopted by the European Parliament, the Council adopts its position. Okay, If they didn't find an agreement on first position, then you continue the trilogues between the first position of the European Parliament and the first position of the Council. You still have enough time because there are no time limits for the position, the option of the position from the Council. So you have enough time to discuss it, to find a compromise. This is the reason why a lot of proposals are decided in the first reading agreement, because as you can have opportunity of many trilogues, you don't have pressure, you can find a compromise. When you go to the second reading or even the conciliation, instead we have so different views that it's quite difficult to find a solution. So instead, when you start the second reading or you go to conciliation, it's unlikely that you find a solution. Maybe just a tactic to find it, to stress or to put pressure on the other institution till the end, or maybe it's just the fact that they have so different views that an agreement cannot be possible. So how it works, I mean, for the first reading, and then we go faster because this is the most important first reading where something has changed. The President arranged for confirmation by Coreper when they found a compromise in trilogue. They go back with the text to the Coreper and say, this is the text, do you agree? Yes. So they send a letter to the Parliament and say, if you adopt this text, we will adopt the same text. So this is called letter of confirmation sent by the Coreper, by Chair Coreper, and to the AP Committee. And that AP Committee re-vote on the text. So we had a mandate in the plenary, but now when we have a text, the text goes again to the committee, is voted to the committee, and it goes again to the plenary to be adopted. Just to say, then when we have this vote, and votes in plenary is a simple majority vote, we circulate as units not of information to the council to say that they have adopted their position. This is just to a bit brief to add the work of lawyer linguist. When you have a trilogue and a joint text, a compromise, then you have the Coreper has sent the letter of confirmation to the European Parliament. Now we have a text which is agreed by the Parliament and the Council, which is officially agreed by the two, but it's not ready for adoption. Why? Because it has to be revised by lawyer linguist. And during the lawyer linguist check again the text, to check all the translation of the text. At this time we worked more or less in English, but at this stage, when you have after the letter of confirmation, lawyer linguist starts to work on all the translations. So we have the translations, we have lawyer linguists which are lawyers which have also linguistic skills, and they check that all translations are perfectly equal one to the other. And they have also an expert meeting to check if at the end all translations, all the texts are exactly the same. Only when they have found that all texts are the same, they can send all the versions to the European Parliament for the adoption. And this takes more or less between 6 and 8 weeks generally. Sometimes 1 week or 2 weeks if it's very urgent, but usually 6 to 8 weeks. Well, this is nothing interesting. Okay. What do we have? If there is no first reading agreement, so if you plan to vote their position, and we are going to the second stage, and the Council reaches a political agreement, so they don't take a position, but they take a political agreement, and this political agreement is actually their position of the Council, but they have to check also this position. They have to check this position, this text, with the lawyer linguist. Once the lawyer linguists are done their job, the text formally becomes the Council position, the first reading. So we have now two positions: the European Parliament one and the Council one. When this Council position goes to the Parliament, we have the second reading position. We started the second reading phase. Before starting this second phase, as we said, we have this so-called pre-negotiated council position. So, as I said, once the Parliament has adopted its position, which is different from what the Council wants, they can continue trilogues. So they can continue the trilogue, and they can find a compromise before the Council adopts its position, so that the Council can adopt a position which is comfortable for the European Parliament. This is the reason why it's called the pre-negotiated Council position, because what the Council will adopt will be exactly what the European Parliament agreed to adopt. So once they have found, if they have found a compromise, they can ask the Council to adopt the position, and we will have the same procedure. So the European Parliament will send a letter from the committee to the Council to say, if you adopt this position, we will, in our second reading, when we adopt our position, the second reading, we will adopt your text. So this is a second opportunity for a compromise. If this is not the case, so if they don't find a compromise, even between the first reading, the position of the European Parliament, the first reading, and the Council position, the first reading, then we start the second reading again without compromise. And this, you may understand that if they didn't find enough enough willingness to find a compromise, difficult to find now the compromise after all the time they had. So now, to push the legislator, when they wrote the treaties, they say now we have to push this stage. We have to put pressures on both institutions and say, if you don't want all the work done will be rejected, will go down, then you have to decide quickly. So they gave 3 months. Still, in this case, the only thing I can add is the fact that the plenary still votes absolutely within absolute majority voting, so they use the majority. But as we say, if no agreement is found, okay, the Council has to vote by unanimity. Let me check, because time is gone. I think that I have more or less at the end, so let me check this next few slides, and I try to close this presentation, this lecture, by just adding some words on the conciliation procedure. The conciliation procedure has to go very quick, because instead of 3 months or no time limits, we have just 6 weeks. 6 weeks is 1 month and a half. If you take into account the agenda of MEP and the Council, this is really, you can meet 2-3 times. So there is always a working method. So we have trilogues, but now we have trilogues now with all the people as before that, with the EP Vice President and Coreper Chair. So we go up one level. Instead of having the people saying, now we have the Coreper Chair and the EP Vice President. So you see that from a political point of view, is much higher the power they have. And they can start immediately whenever they want, basically, when they understand that there will not be a second reading agreement. So the Council will not accept, basically, the position or the amendments made by the European Parliament in the second reading. So they meet together, and they convene. So they meet together, but they can convene officially. They have to officially convene the Conciliation Committee. This time is an official one. And then you have a Ministers' Co-Chairs meeting with the EP Vice President. We have the Commissioner instead of the Director General. And then we have the so-called shuttle diplomacy method. So there is a constant Council and EP delegation meetings. I mean, there are no formalities. They just meet. There are a few people, so they can decide to have an immediate meeting, and they try to negotiate again to find a compromise. If agreement is reached during one of these meetings, they have to close with the procedure with a formal meeting, the conciliation meeting. And as you may understand, as it's quite difficult to find a compromise, they are quite hard. So when they find they find a compromise, when they go to the conciliation meeting, it makes me surprisingly short. I mean, less than 5 and 2 minutes sometimes, because they go there, they say, okay, the conciliation committee is officially open. We found a compromise. Compromise is the number X, Y, Z. Thank you very much for everybody. We are happy. We have a joint text because the meeting is closed, so even less than 1 minute. So sometimes this is quite strange if you are not used to this, to see the conciliation committee so fast. But actually, behind this, there's a lot of work. Well, I can cut the role of co-decision unit just to use the summary. So first reading. Mandate, no time limits, and mandate for trilogues, both for EP and the Council. First reading in the Council and EP simple majority voting. If you want to have a first reading, it means that the Council has to adopt the EP position of first reading. The early second reading or pre-negotiated Council position means that the European Parliament adopts the Council position of first reading. If they don't adopt, we have the second reading. Second reading agreement means that the Council adopts the Council the European position at second reading. They adopt the amendments. Basically, this is what we have. If they don't adopt, we go to the conciliation. The only difference I said in second reading is simple majority. Sorry, for the first reading, probably I was not clear on this. The first reading, the European Parliament votes with simple majority voting. In the second reading, is absolute majority voting, right? And I think this is all I had to do. Yes, because this was the last slide. So thank you everybody for having listened to me. I hope that it was not too problematic. Obviously, if you have questions, has not been so clear, please let me know. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, Roberto, thank you very much for this great presentation. I think it was wonderful to get all the insights from the Council, because it's always good to have somebody who's in the institution and experiences the things in his daily life rather than talking from an academic perspective. Okay. Otherwise, thank you very much for your attention. And again, a big thank you to Roberto, who found the time in his busy schedule to be here with us today. And otherwise, enjoy the afternoon and see you at our next event.